Molly Zapp is a contributing writer at 7 Days and an English instructor at Northern Vermont University, Johnson. Her fiction and nonfiction have appeared in Newfound, Cult Montreal, Art New England, Metro Santa Cruz, Montreal Review of Books, and elsewhere. She's co-author of a chapter in Censored 2007. Originally from the Midwest, she completed a Master of Arts in English Literature, Rhetoric, and Composition from the University of Missouri. She lives in Johnson. So thanks, Molly, and we can get started now.
Thank you so much, Ryan. I'm really grateful to the Vermont Humanities Council for being able to do this presentation. And thank you to everyone who has chosen to take an hour out of your day to show up and participate. Tonight, we're going to learn about how to successfully navigate differences of perspectives, a 21st century superpower if there ever was one. This is a skill that can serve you in many settings, from getting through tricky workplace dynamics to talking about difficult subjects with loved ones who didn't vote like you. You'll come away with some concrete communication techniques that you can put into practice right away. But first, let's be real, as Ryan talked about. One thing that's critically important to consider before engaging in challenging dialogue is an understanding of the energy of the moment. And I want to do that right now. This moment, this election, this time is a time of incredible stress and difficulty for millions of people. The divisiveness and instability in our country has been painful. And only through acknowledging and working through this pain can we hope to heal. So I want to start our presentation with a brief mindfulness practice, a technique that can also help you remain grounded when disagreeing or arguing. In some ways, it's the only thing I feel that I can do right now. So I invite you to first just take a few deep breaths and to allow yourself to arrive fully in the place you are, in the physical space you're in, and in our funky little Zoom world, sharing this specific experience. Allow yourself permission to be here fully. Take a moment to notice what's going on in your body, to notice how you're holding yourself. Are there places in your body where you're feeling stress, tension, tightness? So, congratulations, you're human today. Earlier today, I felt like I had a family of moles starting up a string band in the bottom of my stomach. Right now, lots of tension in the back. And I think this practice of being able to check in with your body, to notice its cues, can help ground you in many situations. So for the moment, keep breathing slowly. See if it's possible to relax your body, and even just one of those parts, just a little bit. See what happens when you can allow it some air to loosen its grip a little. Still breathing. Consider your intentions in coming to this presentation and see if within that, are there any feelings of openness, curiosity, that you're drawn to having better dialogues and relationships at all? Is a great place to start. The next slide. So I'm going to start off in this presentation talking about things to do and keep in mind before you even begin having a conversation. It's often said, first, know your audience. Well, know, in fact, that they're human and how humans work. Consider the humanity and imperfections of your audience and of yourself. It's been demonstrated many times. Humans are not rational actors. I come from the school of rhetoric, and in rhetoric, we understand that people form beliefs and take actions often based around identification. I'm vegetarian, so I do this. I'm Republican, so I believe this. I'm a good person and I do this. Whether or not people are connecting their identity and their actions, this is often how people really do, in fact, make decisions, not because of logic or facts. The sociologist Arlie Hochschild notes that feelings are, in fact, often detached from facts. And she talks about how people experience life as what she calls felt truths. That is, we see our lives and the world through a conditioned narrative lens. We storytell, basically. Again, these aren't based on broad evidence, but are nonetheless felt deeply as true. As humans, we tend to repel or ignore facts that challenge our felt truths and invite those facts that strengthen them. So, of course, this has echoes of confirmation bias, which we already know is a real thing. Our biology even plays a role in how we hold on to opinions. Jack Gorman and Sarah Gorman, psychiatrist and a public health specialist, wrote a book about forming opinions, kind of how people do it. They cite research suggesting that people experience genuine pleasure, that is, a rush of dopamine in the brain, when processing information that supports their beliefs. Literally, it feels good to stick to our guns, even if we're wrong. So that means even when we are confronted by information, facts, evidence that challenges what we believe, we are neurologically rewarded for holding on to that belief. And I think that this is really important to remember these powerful forces that actually shape how we understand the world, how we communicate. I'm a journalist and a writing teacher, so of course I think that reliable sources and facts are really important. Scientific method, solid evidence, this is good. And certainly specific evidence from reliable sources is useful to have in your mind and to discuss, to whip out. But do that with the understanding that facts and logic alone rarely cause people to make significant shifts in their thinking. So think about it for yourself. How many times have you done a 180 in your thinking, especially as an adult? Or even shifted your beliefs significantly? It's much easier for people to be moved to care more about an issue that they haven't considered a lot than to significantly shift their viewpoints for something they already have a strong opinion on. But people argue with one another as if, if I just give them the right fact, I just give them this evidence, get in that perfect zinger, the other person will instantly change their mind. Well, not only is this an unrealistic goal, but it's an approach that impedes good communication and respectful dialogue. Good communication requires emotional intelligence, empathy, and curiosity. Next slide. You will be unable to have constructive conversations if thoughts of, I just don't understand how these people could think this, are overpowering your mind beforehand or during a conversation. And if you get to the, are you effing kidding me mode, chances for having a constructive conversation are completely out the window. You really have no chance to learn anything or to change any minds. The antidote to seeing other people and the world from our own inherently narrow perspectives is simply curiosity and empathy. When thoughts of, I don't understand how people could think, arise, a good question to ask yourself is, how have I tried to understand? If your process of trying to understand hasn't included reading or deeply listening to those voices, then you've been leaving out a critically important method. And that might be something to chew on for a while. You might not be ready to listen to those voices, and it's okay if it takes some time. But this is a step that really you can't skip if you want to try to understand other perspectives and have people from other perspectives try to understand yours. This can seem insurmountable. We exist in our echo chambers. It can be hard to feel like conversations across differences are possible or could be fruitful, but they are possible and they can be fruitful. Arlie Hochschild talks about our empathy walls, which is basically the walls that we construct to include and exclude people we see as deserving of empathy and understanding. People left, right, and center construct these walls, and sometimes they're really heavily fortified. If people feel judged, guarded, or uncared for, they're unlikely to listen to what you're saying, let alone change their minds. The key here is genuinely wanting to understand how other people understand the world and feeling empathy that extends, ideally, to all people. And that can be really hard to do. That wasn't how I was raised. This hasn't been a skill that's come naturally for me. It really feels like a skill to learn and a muscle to work, and an imperfect practice, but a practice that's helpful. If building some of that empathy feels difficult or insurmountable, a lot of spiritual and religious beliefs have systems that encourage loving kindness or loving your neighbor or simply ways of being in better relationships with other people. So perhaps reaching out to any spiritual or religious leaders, reading some of those books, or talking with mentors, talking with elders, talking with people who seem really patient or to have a lot of empathy. Hey, how do you do that? I think this is a process of learning together. So see what works for other people. Or think about, I know that I have had plenty of conversations with friends who have similar perspectives to me, and we'll get to talking about politics, and this, how can they think that, will arise. Well, what about if friends switch that? Instead of complaining or commiserating on what we don't understand, what if the conversation shifted to, hey, I'm struggling to understand how to do this, but I want to connect to Uncle Bob and I'm not sure. What have you tried? Ask people what has worked for them, and be willing to experiment and be willing to be imperfect and learn. So let's say you have a particular issue you feel passionate about and you want to talk a lot of people about. Or perhaps you're wanting to change in company policy at your workplace and you want to figure out how to affect that change, keeping in mind workplace dynamics, all of that. Well, one thing that political strategists use, and this is on all sides, we can call this spectrum of agreement. And this is a spectrum of agreement that ranges from 1 to 5. So on this spectrum, ones are people that either completely or mostly agree with you. Twos largely agree with you. Threes maybe have mixed feelings or don't have a lot of opinions on this. Fours mostly disagree, and fives strongly disagree. So where the person, your audience, you're having this conversation with, and I say audience in a broad way, this can be a one-on-one, this can be at a group meeting, where they fall on this spectrum agreement, it's going to depend on how you kind of frame your argument. So let's say it's you anticipate you're talking to someone you think mostly agrees with you. Preaching to the choir. Well, if that's what you're doing, you're probably focusing on motivating. You're motivating to get them to the polls. You're motivating them to take a certain action. Shifting further to the middle, then what you're trying to do is encourage buy-in. For the threes, how can you make them care about what you're saying? So again, people are highly unlikely to make those huge shifts in their thinking because of one conversation. What is possible is to have a healthy dialogue that increases mutual understanding and to possibly plant some seeds. So next one. Because you do have influence. The issue or issues you care about are not lost causes. People can and do shift their thinking. How you encourage this will depend in part on the relationship you already have with your audience. I think sometimes we think, oh, I can't talk about this difficult thing. It'll hurt our relationship. And you can't talk about it maybe in certain ways. And it is possible to hurt a relationship. But the other side of that is that we have the most influence on people we already know and have commonalities and connections with. Who was more likely to help change the racist leanings of, say, your grandfather? It's probably not a politician, writer, or an activist. It's you, because you already have an important relationship, and that person cares about your opinion of them, and hopefully also cares about your opinion. I think it's important to remember that differences are not inherently threatening. And holding on to this is where self-confidence and humility come into play. So the humility side is simply accepting the reality that you're human and that you can be wrong sometimes, that our understandings are often incomplete, and that you have more to learn. And on the self-confidence side is simply knowing that you can be yourself and have your beliefs without needing everyone in your life to agree with them, because that's never going to happen, and that's an exhausting goal to have. And as much as possible, when you're having difficult dialogues, treat people as allies or as potential allies, unrecruited allies, not as enemies. To treat someone as an enemy is to damage your cause, your relationships, and your sense of connection with fellow humans. And as much as you can, build relationships, not resentments. Find things that you appreciate about someone, or maybe the commonalities or an activity that you do together. If you're only able to see someone as how they vote or how they conduct themselves in a certain area, that's a really limited view of them. On a lighter note, I remember when I was younger going to concerts of bands that I loved and being shocked to see that some people in the crowd were acting like total jerks. And I think what, bothered 20-something me was this, wow, someone could feel this music I feel deeply and spend money on this ticket and have this and still be a total jerk. I had been holding on to the delusion that only cool people could like some of the same things that I like or believe some of the same things. Well, in reality, plenty of people who vote as I do or hold on to some of the same views or have similar beliefs about the world and how we got here can be really difficult people. And of course, the inverse is also true, that people who hold beliefs and vote in ways I strongly disagree with can also be good people, can bring their coworkers cookies for their birthdays, kindly to their neighbors, donate their time or money to charities that help people. And as much as possible, connect over commonalities and don't only define others by the characteristics you like least about them or differ from them the most. Next slide. Timing is critical. And I think the idea of a heat index is a really useful tool in helping you decide when and how to make a specific argument. So right now, obviously, heat is high about certain issues. So when you're anticipating high heat, you want to come for a place of caution, to offer a bit of a balance to maybe anticipated feelings of passion. On the other hand, say it's low to medium heat. You're at work and you're wanting to do this change or you're bothered by something, but this hasn't really been something that's going around the office. So if it's a lower heat, what you want to focus on is why people should care. In that case, use inclusive language to encourage buy-in. Then there's the timing. What else is happening in the world, in the room, that's on people's minds? So here, emotional intelligence is really coming into play. Especially with power dynamics in workplace situations, family dynamics, friend dynamics. And self-awareness, really important. Is your impassioned speech to your partner about the critical importance of perfectly separating recycling and trash really about helping the environment? Or is it a proxy for your discontent at other aspects of your relationship? Know yourself in this. And ask, especially for difficult conversations that you want to initiate, is this the right moment to have this conversation? You know, Thanksgiving dinner. Is it great because this is important and you want to talk with lots of your family members you love? Or is this just going to tick off the people who have spent hours making the meal? And maybe that's not the best time. And of course, people bring up conversations when we're not initiating it. If that happens and it just seems like a bad timing, it's okay to ask to talk about it another time. Maybe reflect back, I'm glad you brought this up. Can we talk about it later? Can we talk about it next week? Something like that shows that you care, but doesn't go there if you're sensing that it's not just the right time to do it. So next one. So now we're almost getting to where you talk. Before you speak, turn off your alarm system and listen. Frankly, the simplest technique to getting people to listen to you is to listen to them first. People who feel listened to are more likely to return in kind. If you go in rigid, thinking you know everything about this subject, going to drop some knowledge on someone, going to talk down to this idiot, people feel that. And you're unlikely to have a successful conversation. Listening first shows goodwill and it shows your curiosity. All right, almost talking now. So we want to identify and acknowledge personal and shared goals. So you want to consider both your goals and intentions and their goals and intentions. And this will look different depending on this is a conversation you're planning on initiating, a very specific one, or is this something that you want to keep in mind knowing that conversations about topics you care about will spontaneously arise? So a key difference here is intentions, not expectations. Expectations are planned disappointment. Let's make it a little bit more realistic. So maybe your intentions could simply be to deepen mutual understanding, to listen and feel heard, or maybe they're a little more specific. You want to encourage or stop a certain action, or encourage people to vote in a certain way. Or maybe there's other things going on in those intentions. Maybe you just want to be right, or to look smart, or to make someone else look like a jerk, or to keep this person who you're afraid is reflecting on you just to get them to stop talking. It's totally human if some of those last few things that I said arise. But notice some of those and see if in those situations, if continuing with the conversation is the best choice, or if maybe it's not the best time. So some personal goals in conversations could be as simple as planting a seed, keeping your mind open, being thoughtful, respectful, and clear, and hoping that you learn something. It can be helpful to lead or to bring in an acknowledgement of your shared goals. So this is kind of where you start talking. And the challenge here is, instead of an adversarial approach, can you make it one of shared concern? That can look like acknowledging things that you both want. So say you're talking with a friend where you have differing views on vaccination policies for kids. So you're understanding this is a high heat thing. So starting off with acknowledgement of something like, we both want our kids to be safe and healthy. That you have that you can acknowledge when you have these same goals, you just have different visions of what that looks like, can help people keep their guard down and remain open to listening and to communicating. Or acknowledging other commonalities or interconnections. We're all Americans trying to get through this. We all want good lives for our families, good work. Avoid cheesy platitudes, but sometimes some of these just reiterating basic commonalities can help just keep the conversation going. So next one, People often stop listening to the words of others after a few seconds or after finding a single objection. We hear this thing that someone says, and immediately in our head, we're forming that response. Or maybe we're interrupting, getting into it right away. Maybe we're like letting them rattle on as we're like getting this perfect little zinger that's going to change everything. Instead of trying that, show that you're truly listening by reflecting their words back to them and by asking some good questions. So simply repeating back some of the things they say in nugget form keeps the conversation going. So they've been going on for a little bit. Maybe you could say something like, it seems like you're saying that you're not satisfied with how the school district consolidation is going. Then you get, yes, exactly. I'm totally frustrated. Or maybe, I think I'm hearing you're frustrated by how expensive healthcare is. You better believe it. And then they're feeling understood. So they're feeling safe. So they're able to continue talking instead of hearing your objections right away and responding with defensiveness. Another tool is simply to ask questions about their experiences, which makes them feel valued. Instead of saying, Uncle Jim, you're racist and we need to talk about it. Maybe bring that curiosity again. What did you learn about race growing up? This is the difference between talking at someone with a rigid agenda and having a dialogue driven by curiosity and empathy, and really a low agenda. Patience and a willingness to be vulnerable help too. This next one is an interesting trick of mine. To get people to really go beyond just repeating the same talking points they've told themselves over and over. And this is actually to ask questions about policy. So in a research study by some folks at the University of Colorado that was looking at how people change their political opinions, researchers asked two groups of people their opinions on a particular policy. In this case, it was carbon emissions trading. Group number one was asked to simply give their opinion and provide their reasons for why they held that view. Group number two was asked to explain step by step how the policy that they supported would actually work. Results? People who were asked to provide their reasons remained fixed in them, not a surprise. But those who were asked to explain how they would work softened their views, acknowledged that they understood it less well than they thought. People who'd been strongly for or against carbon emissions trading tended to become more moderate, ranking themselves as less certain in their support or opposition to the policy. And this is in part because all of us, in some area or another, have a stronger opinion on something than we actually have an understanding of it. So when you ask for those details, what could that look like? How could that be implemented? Really, getting people to envision and explain the logistics interrupts the spiel from repeating and repeating and repeating. Moving on is something that you need to do sometimes. So if things get heated, there are ways to de-escalate. Like we did at the beginning, very briefly, notice what your body's telling you in the moment. How's your breathing? You breathing deeper, faster? Is your voice becoming faster, elevated? Are you noticing a physical tension? Are you leaning forward? Do you feel like you're responding or are you reacting? Are you able to notice an openness, a continuous curiosity? That can be actually a really delightful experience when you're noticing, oh, we're having this conversation and this is kind of hard, but I'm actually learning something. However, if things are escalating, possible interventions can just be a pause, take a breath, switch up your physical space a little bit, move around, uncross your arms, or an acknowledgement. acknowledge the difficulty aloud. Yeah, we both seem to be really passionate about this. We have strong opinions. And within that, depending on the type of relationship you have with this person, reaffirming that you care about them and value their opinion. You know, depending on the conversation, telling people that you love them, that you respect them, can help keep that guard down. And when possible, humor. Humor's great. And when it's time to close the conversations, show your appreciations and move on. And with any luck, you've learned something, planted a seed, and shown yourself as a good actor who cares about their relationships and community. Just to kind of sum up the key points that we went over to expressing your mind well. First, you got to know that audience, the intentions that they have, that you have, and the heat index that this conversation is unfolding. Second, and I would say these are the two most important things, are lead with curiosity and deconstruct your empathy wall. And then when you're actually in the conversation, reflect those words back and ask good questions. So in closing, here are a couple quotes from thinkers I admire that I've kind of been chewing on these a little bit. As the Buddha noted, those who cling to their views go about the world annoying people. Open-mindedness is the antidote. And then this from Krista Tippett, who did a great interview with Arlie Hochschild, who I talked about, the sociologist I talked about earlier. Krista Tippett's the host of On Being. If you're interested in this at all, I'd highly recommend checking out that particular podcast or Arlie Hochschild's book. And Krista Tippett just says, you want to be right in every moment, or do you want to be part of the larger healing? So I hope I've given you some practical tools to help communicate better, even in the midst of big disagreements. Constructive dialogue across differences is not something that comes natural to us. This is definitely a skill to be developed, a muscle to be used regularly. It's not a destination. It's not a switch that can be turned on and off. And it's not something I'm perfect at. I encourage you, when going through these experiences, to allow openness, to allow people to disagree, to allow discomfort, and to allow yourself and others to make mistakes, and to allow yourself and others to grow. Sometimes it's helpful for me to think about all the people who are patient with me, particularly when I was younger and dumb, who showed me patience and asked me good questions and helped get me thinking about things and shape the way that I see the world. And I can also think about times where people approach me with self-righteousness or judgment or rigidity, and how that produced the opposite effect. How it made me maybe distrust people who had those particular views. Or to simply have a distaste for it because of a distasteful experience. This is how we understand the world, is kind of the flavors that we pick up from these experiences. I will say, in this wacky moment we're living in, that right now, my felt truth makes me believe that we are actually in the midst of the great American healing. And I don't know if we're in the preface or chapter 1, but I do think that this is something that our country is not only capable of, but already in the process of. And there's been a lot of work on that. And I see this as something that will last my entire lifetime, and a task that's worth it. So thank you so much for taking the time to be here. Here's my contact information if you want to reach out. But if anyone has any questions, I'd love to hear. So thank you so much.
How to deal with people who get personal in their attacks during disagreements, and how do you take the high road?
This is a tricky thing because we can do all these practices like, all right, I'm going to have this intention. I'm going to try to do this, but that doesn't mean that other people are doing that. I think that's situational. I think that if someone really is intent on attacking, then naming that behavior briefly and just taking a step back and kind of cutting off the conversation is about all you can do. Winning is not going to be possible with someone who just wants to attack. And depending on your relationship, if say this is someone you're close with, you can say, that feels hurtful. That feels like a personal attack. Or maybe you can ask them, what are your intentions here? Are you willing to have a conversation where instead of trying to convince each other, we try to understand each other better? Pop that and see what it does. Maybe they would be willing, and maybe it hadn't crossed their mind that that's a possibility, to just try to understand as opposed to convince. Maybe they're going to be unavailable for that type of conversation. And that's just something to, you can say, I wish we could do this. I feel sad that we can't just try to understand each other more. Maybe another time with some space, we could try to do that. I will say if this is an online thing, battle the trolls to your own peril, or Facebook sort of things. Honestly, I feel like so much online communication is fruitless and is ugly and is a waste of emotional energy. So personally, this is a field that I basically don't try in because I just haven't really seen it be productive. What I have seen it do is get people more fixed in their views. In person, I think there is a possibility. So thank you for your question. All right, seeing one from Patrick.
Patrick had asked the previous question.
Oh, thanks, Patrick.
So I think he's just trying to clarify.
Yeah, shift the framing of the conversation, and I think make the conversation about the conversation, as opposed to about the issue or about the disagreement. See where that goes. If you can make agreements to listen, to be good to each other, to not be ugly, to try to understand instead of convince, then that's your starting block. If you can't agree to that, just ain't gonna happen in that particular situation with that particular person at the moment.
I guess a question that I have sort of coming off of what you mentioned about social media and trolls. I know it's kind of hard to label somebody as a troll. And I know you covered some of this in your talk, but where are those sort of indicators where, oh, this might not be fruitful or this person might be invested in the conflict more than in any sort of understanding?
I think that can go for body language. I actually really think our bodies tell us a lot about that. And are they doing the practices that we talk about? Is there any reflecting of what you're saying? Or is there just like opinion, information versus information? These sort of, maybe refuting of evidence with, well, what about this thing? Then you tend to be seeing like a breakdown of communication.
Sometimes I guess just like everybody, reflecting on what's been happening with the country, sometimes it feels like we're really trying to talk against these gigantic gulfs. And, I would probably put myself, like if it's in the New York Times, to me, that's true. That's objective truth. But for other people, that's not the case. Anything that was printed in the New York Times is a lie or is a falsehood. And I might feel the exact opposite about some other media. I mean, do you have any thoughts about? I really liked what you said about this is a national dialogue that maybe we're just getting started on, or it's a national project. Do you have any thoughts about that? That we have these realities that are just so different, where we're kind of looking at different fact sets?
Yeah, this is definitely something that I've been chewing on and that I frankly feel distress around. I think there that reliable and fact check media is really important, and I think that it exists and that we should take those perspectives seriously. And the reality is that we live in a time where there's a profound anti-intellectualism, a strong anti-media bias, um, and where evidence doesn't necessarily work. And that can feel really, really frustrating. For me, a technique for me not going bonkers in that is to really, really take the long view. Um, you know, widespread literacy hasn't been around for that long of a time in the course of human history. The scientific method, the way that we understand how disease is transmitted, a lot of this information that for those of us who have internalized it and don't broadly question it seems like, well, duh. Well, this is actually pretty new to a large spectrum of society. And so I really just try to, without feeling condescending, which is a task for me in this particular detail, I try to just see it as this isn't surprising. People have held on to superstitions, and they're have overemphasized their individual experience, which I think we all do. We overemphasize the I, and which the I does matter. The I definitely does matter. But see our narrow instead of the broader picture all the time.
There's a question here from Gail. I just wanted to be sensitive that I've asked a number of questions.
Thank you for your question, Gail. Asking about my interpretation of the Krista Tippett's quote, and what it means to me. Well, and kind of going back to the evidence thing, of course, there's a part of me that deeply believes that I'm right, or at least right about some things some of the time. And I understand that other people believe that too. And probably equally as to what I do. But I think, I personally come from a background of journalism and activism, and I also have a spiritual background. And I think for me, what Tippett says about, do you want to be right all the time, or do you want to be part of the larger healing? I mean, to me, that's about what actually brings about happiness and what brings about good relationships. And it's not actually me being right or everyone agreeing with me. It's really people listening and being willing to heal, and even myself with the views that I cherish, to hold on to them a little less tightly. And I guess see relationships and connections with people as more important than viewpoints.